All right, today we're cracking open the playbook for absolute power in the 18th century. We're going to look at how these incredibly ambitious rulers literally built nations, outsmarted everyone around them, and ended up redrawing the entire map of Europe. So, yeah, let's get right into it. So, what does it actually take to rule absolutely? I mean, is it as simple as having a big army and a fancy crown? Or is there something more to it, like a secret set of rules, a blueprint for total domination? That's the big question we're digging into here. And to really get a handle on this playbook, we're going to look at two very different but equally powerful models. First up, you've got Louis XIV of France, the famous Sun King. I mean, this guy basically wrote the original rulebook. And then on the other side, we have Frederick the Great of Prussia. He's a whole different animal, a new kind of ruler who took that old school absolute control and mixed it with these wild new ideas from the Enlightenment. Okay, so let's start with the basics. We're going to examine the foundational rules of the game, laid out by the guy who pretty much was the era, Louis XIV. So the whole idea of absolutism really hinges on this one core concept, the divine right of kings. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some excuse to grab power. It was this deeply held belief that the king's authority came straight from God. Think about what that means in practice. It means you're above the law. You answer to literally no one on earth. Not the people, not your nobles, not even the church. Okay, so you've got this divine right thing going for you. But how do you actually turn that into real-world, on-the-ground control? Well, this next part breaks down the essential strategies every single one of these rulers had to nail down at home. And it really boils down to a three-step plan. Step 1, centralize the government. Make sure every decision, all the power, flows right through you. Step 2, get the nobility under control. These guys are your biggest threat from the inside. And step 3, build yourself a modern professional army that's loyal to you and only you and the new state you're building. And you want to see a genius move for that second step? Look no further than Louis XIV. He was actually haunted by this noble rebellion that happened when he was a kid. So what does he do? He builds the insanely lavish Palace of Versailles, and then he forces his nobles to live there with him. It was basically a gilded cage. He trapped them in this world of constant parties, ridiculous ceremonies, and all this backstabbing just to get his attention. A total masterstroke. This golden hive kept his enemies close, distracted, and completely dependent on him. Now, Louis used spectacle and ceremony, right? Well, over in Russia, Peter the Great, he used brute force. To drag Russia kicking and screaming into the modern age, he built this massive standing army. He forced landowners and peasants alike into what was basically lifelong service. He built a navy completely from scratch, and even set up a secret police to just crush anyone who got in his way. This wasn't just an army he was building, it was the brutal engine of his absolute power. All right, so once you've got everything locked down at home, what's next? It's time to go global. Let's move on to the next chapter in the playbook, taking all that power and using it on the world stage, which almost always meant war and conquest. And boy, does the year 1740 give us a perfect example. It's like a perfect storm. The Habsburg emperor dies, and he leaves his enormous territory to his daughter, Maria Theresa. Now, on paper, her succession was supposed to be guaranteed by all these international treaties. But there's a new king in Prussia, this young, ambitious guy named Frederick II. And where everyone else saw a promise, he saw an opportunity. So this is Maria Theresa. Her dad had literally spent his entire reign getting all these promises on paper from the other European powers, making them swear they'd respect her right to rule. But here's the thing about the world of absolute monarchs. A piece of paper is only as good as the army standing behind it. And this is the guy who took all those promises and just tore them to shreds. Frederick the Great. Almost the first thing he does as king is launch a surprise invasion of his neighbor. Just like that. He completely shatters the peace in Europe and kicks off what we now call the War of the Austrian Succession. And what was he after? This was the prize, Silesia. It was a super rich, industrialized province. But for Frederick, this wasn't just about grabbing land and resources. No, this was a statement. It was a cold, ruthless declaration to all of Europe that Prussia was now a major player, and he was a king you did not want to mess with. But don't mistake him for just some hot-headed warmonger. Frederick was a cold, calculating strategist. He had this famous critique of the ancient general Hannibal, saying, "You know how to win a victory, but not how to use it." And that tells you everything you need to know about his philosophy. For him, winning battles was pointless if you couldn't turn that victory into a real, tangible political win. And this is where things get really interesting, because we run into this bizarre paradox. Rulers like Frederick, they weren't just about war and strategy. They were also huge fans of culture, science, and new ideas. And this combination gives us this fascinating new character on the world stage, the enlightened despot. So, what exactly is an enlightened despot? Well, think of it as a whole new type of absolute ruler. These were monarchs who were all about the Enlightenment, ideas like reason, progress, social reform. They'd support artists and scientists, but, and this is the absolute key, they never ever gave up an ounce of their total control. And this right here, this just perfectly shows the paradox of Frederick the Great. On one hand, you have the enlightened ruler. He got rid of judicial torture. He was friends with the famous philosopher Voltaire. He even composed music. But then you look at the other side, the absolute despot. He kept the brutal system of serfdom in place. He said the army was the most important part of the state, and he taxed his people like crazy to pay for all his wars. And Catherine the Great of Russia is another classic example. I mean, she founded the incredible Hermitage Museum. She was a huge supporter of the arts. She was fantastic at crafting this image of herself as an enlightened ruler for the rest of the world. But back home, her so-called reforms did next to nothing for the average person, and the serfs suffered horribly under her reign. So after all this maneuvering and war and reform, what was the end game? What did this power playbook actually accomplish? Let's take a look at the legacy these monarchs left behind. Honestly, the results kind of speak for themselves. Just look at these maps. You can see the massive growth of Prussia under Frederick and Russia under Catherine. It's incredible. They used this mix of pure ambition, smart diplomacy, and brutal warfare to turn their countries from just regional powers into massive continent-spanning empires. But you have to see their legacy as a double-edged sword. On one side, yes, they created these strong, modern nations that would dominate European politics for centuries, absolutely. But on the other side, these powerful nations were built on a really shaky foundation of unchecked power and massive social inequality. And those tensions, well, they would eventually explode into the revolutions that came next. And that really leaves us with this big question that still hangs over us today, right? These rulers literally forged nations out of nothing but their own willpower, mixing this brutal, practical approach with a real love for culture. But it really makes you wonder, where do you draw the line between a great leader who builds a nation and just a power-hungry despot?